and welcome to the Integration Station. I'm your host, Michael, a child and adolescent occupational therapist, and I'm flying solo today. Had a few questions that came through on the email, and I thought rather than wait for a future episode, we'd try and answer this as quickly as possible. Maybe it's my impulsivity taking over, but the question was, how do we reduce impulsivity in kids with ADHD, especially when it is impulsivity plus attention seeking? So a fair question, and I think the listener has obviously seen that for someone either that they work with or maybe their own child. One of the hallmarks of ADHD can be impulsivity, and that very much stems from executive functioning differences. So that could be difficulties in inhibition and emotional regulation that can lead to impulsivity. There are lots of ways that you can explore that. And for those who maybe don't have an ADHD diagnosis, one of the observations can be that an individual might be quite impulsive or have difficulties with inhibiting their responses, have quite heightened emotions. Again, that could be a number of things, but in the case we're looking at here, the functional impact is the impulsivity on a day-to-day basis. So the question asked how to reduce impulsivity. And I think the first thing I can say is understanding, as I said, that impulsivity is often quite a big component and something that can continue to be a challenge. So I would say rather than focusing on reducing it, it's understanding it and maybe what drives the impulsivity in the first place. Often impulsivity can come from a range of things. It could be that someone is more emotionally charged, they may be bored, they may be looking for increased stimulation. When we are looking to support someone who's quite impulsive, we have to understand why they are more impulsive. From the neurophysiology of an ADHD brain, there are chemical differences, and that difference can mean that parts of the brain find it harder to work in those executive functioning components, and those components are very much part of that frontal lobe of the brain. There are similarities with other neurodivergents such as autism, and what we do know is that in these situations, rational thinking can become quite impacted. Impulsivity is often a result of parts of the brain finding it harder to make sense of what's going on and looking for answers. And when our brain is working extremely hard, we look to find solutions very quickly. We might see things. It could be a matter of the sensory world is quite overloaded as well, and we're acting impulsively as a result of the world around us. For a lot of young people that we see, ADHD goes hand in hand with other sensory processing and sensory modulation differences. As mentioned, it could be that their environment is quite overwhelming and visually distractible, and so they become quite distracted by things that are around them. They could be diverting their attention because of a lot of noise. There could be a lot of movement, and their impulsivity is a result of the fact that they want to move their body, and their body is telling them, you need to move, therefore I will move. I guess the biggest challenge of impulsivity comes down to the potential consequences of it. Sometimes being impulsive can be okay. You might jump into an activity when other people weren't ready, and that is a good thing. You might be playing a sport and you're the first one to jump in and you're the first one to get the ball because you're a bit more impulsive and took that leap. But it can also be difficult when you've acted first and something else has happened that maybe I've jumped in and am unsafe, or it could be I've chosen to buy something and I didn't have the money for it and reacted quite impulsively. Again, there are multiple reasons as to why this might happen, but in this case, and for a child, ADHD can often present with impulsivity, and so how do we work with that? So if you looked at different ways to work through this, there are a number of methods, and there are certainly different programs, techniques, and lots of specific strategies that you can find. One that I do want to mention today is one that is actually being developed by a South Australian psychologist called Lindy Peterson, who has the Stop, Think, Do program. Lindy's been a clinical psychologist for a number of years and well known in South Australia. A lot of her work, not just clinically, but also in the development of her Stop, Think, Do program, has revolved around understanding the difficulties that neurodivergence can have on emotional regulation, emotional control, and executive functioning. The Stop, Think, Do program has a 3-step process which essentially is to stop, noticing something that happens, and it could be an emotion, an urge, something that is taking over the body. Then to think about what's actually happening. How is this impacting me? How is this changing how I'm presenting? What are the best choices to make in this moment? And then the do component is enacting based on the stopping and thinking and processing and then responding. This can be quite a tricky process in its infancy, but certainly having a method of allowing someone to stop and work through the cognitive parts of their brain to try and enact a desirable response is an effective way of teaching someone how to work through that impulsivity. And whilst it may not fully reduce the impulsivity, it may support a person to have strategies to change the way their brain is thinking in particular moments. This very much comes from a cognitive behavioural strategy and a cognitive behavioural therapy approach, whereby we are trying to work through those thinking parts of the brain to override some of those impulses. So one of the key parts here is that stop, and the stop can be where the biggest challenges arise. If we are encouraging someone to stop and think before they do something, what we're trying to do here is intervene before there's an automatic reactivity response. It creates this space for conscious awareness. It creates an opportunity for someone to pause before acting. And this can often be the biggest challenge. If we think about any instance when we're impulsive, we are doing without thinking. Again, there might be instances where this is okay, but sometimes we need to stop before we do something because consequences might not be what we would like. It's important to acknowledge that for younger children and children in general, their brains are still developing, and so this process is still very hard. They are often reacting to their environment. For young people where there may be an intellectual disability or their cognitive capacity is impacted, this is even harder because in strategies such as this, we are tapping into cognitive skills and we're requiring someone to be able to understand and process this information. So whilst this strategy can be quite useful and the Stop, Think, Do program is well researched and evidence-based, there are also other small techniques and strategies that people might be able to do. As mentioned, sometimes a physical or a body cue can be supportive. It could be each time I'm thinking of something, I might have a stress ball, or I might have something I squeeze, or something that I use that when I'm feeling an urge, that it will ground me and help me redirect back to the moment itself. Co-regulation is really important here, and a lot of children who are impulsive, particularly those who may have an intellectual disability, do still require a degree of support from someone, such as an adult, to guide them in decision making. Again, this is a tricky process, but if it's done in the right way, through the use of visuals, through repetition and a collaborative approach, we can certainly reduce someone's initial response. If we're thinking of impulsivity, we're thinking of that initial response. If we can create a pause, even if it's 5 seconds, that would stop someone from maybe running out onto the road, running or absconding out of the door or of a space. It can certainly provide a buffer to the next step. What we do know about ADHD and the differences in executive functioning is that sometimes there are challenges in internal cues. That internal regulation means that external factors are really important and it can act as brakes to reduce, say, impulsivity or actions that may lead to a less desirable outcome. Having things like timers, having visual schedules, or even visual cues to support can be quite effective. We also have to be really conscious here about making whatever approach we take neuroaffirming. Again, I don't want to stop someone's brain working in the way that it works. We have to understand that all brains are different, and that impulsivity can, as I mentioned, be something that can work in some situations. For a lot of people, they don't always want to be this impulsive, but sometimes impulsivity is the way their brain works, and so we have to understand, how do we make it more functional? Sometimes we might choose to be impulsive in physical activity, but in a safe way. If someone is being impulsive, maybe it's an indication to say maybe they need more regulation, maybe we need to get more movement into them. One thing that I do know for a lot of young people with ADHD is that medication can be effective. Whilst I'm not always someone to advocate for medication in all instances, it is certainly evidence-based based and quite well proven that for a lot of individuals with ADHD that can be quite a effective and supportive method to assist with a lot of the differences that come with executive functioning. Again, the way that these medications can impact the frontal lobe or that prefrontal cortex can certainly support a more regulated state and allow a buffer zone, some time for thinking to occur. As we mentioned before, when we don't have that time and when our brain is racing, our mind is highly active, impulsivity can occur more consistently. So sometimes medication can be a good way to just provide a little bit more time for that brain to think and enact some further steps. In referring back to the question, there was also another part that asked about attention seeking. I've always had a question mark around attention seeking because, like any behavior, I see that as an individual's desire to meet an unmet need. So in this case, the attention seeking may actually be someone seeking out co-regulation in that instance because they find it hard to regulate themselves without support. The attention seeking could be, I want to show you something and the only way I can do that is by being extremely impulsive because I know that's going to get your attention. When we're thinking about attention seeking more broadly, I think it's really important, again, to think about the why and also understand that is it attention seeking or is it a need for connection? Is the attention something that is sought out because that person can't get attention in another way? Or is it they're wanting to do something that's highly active or listening to what their body is actually asking of them and just enacting it in that moment? So one tool I have used and do encourage therapists and parents to explore is the motivational assessment scale. This has been around for a while. What it does is it looks at the underlying motivations that drive an individual's response or behaviour. This scale, developed by Mark Durand and Daniel Crimmins, has a range of questions, and it can be in a shortened form with up to 16 questions or a longer form which has 40 plus questions. And it just asks a range of different questions around a specific behaviour. So let's say, for example, the behaviour is my child is impulsive and is seeking attention by running out onto the road when I say no. You can go through the questions and it will give you a score from 0 to 6 or 1 to 5, depending on the scale. And it'll help you answer potentially what the behaviour may be indicating. And the responses that come up with are either whether it's a sensory thing, something tangible, as in if they want something, if it's an escape or they're wanting to leave, or it is an attention-seeking response. When it refers to that attention-seeking response, that's generally in relation to I'm wanting connection and I'm wanting time with this person. So when we think of someone who's quite impulsive and potentially maybe doing things to seek attention, maybe that is an example of I need to do something to a more impulsive or more heightened level in order to get my attention need met. Everybody has attention needs. And I remember one therapist once mentioning to me that a child will do anything to get attention, whether it's good or bad, because sometimes for some kids, attention is like air. If you don't get it, you can't breathe. So it's really important to understand that at times attention may be indicating something else. And also in the context of ADHD and impulsivity, that those attention needs may lead to an increased response or a more impulsive response in order to obtain that attention. So in finally summarizing the question, I think it's important to draw back on understanding that supporting or reducing, as was asked, that person's difficulties, impulsivity as a result of ADHD, should be framed in how do we support them and upskill them as opposed to reducing the impulsivity in the first place. By supporting and giving them strategies, there will be reduction in the impact of the impulsivity, but also understanding that that impulsivity is still part of their brain and something that they're always trying to work through. We talked about some strategies, and certainly the Stop, Think, Do program is one approach, but there are a number of other approaches out there and small strategies that people can implement to support someone to have an opportunity for their brain to pause before they respond and produce an action. It's really important to understand that for a child that's quite impulsive, this is something that their brain is constantly working through. They're not doing this deliberately. They're working really hard within their body. It's important to validate and support and upskill rather than point out the impulsivity as a negative thing. I think sometimes that can impact a person's self-concept, and certainly make them think that the impulsivity is a hallmark of their presentation as opposed to something they're continuing to work through. So that's a quick summary of that question and a bit of information around impulsivity. There are some excellent resources. The one book is the ADHD 2.0, which is an excellent book. But the resources we mentioned today, the Stop, Think, Do program, which you can find online, and we'll link it in the show notes, as well as the motivational assessment scale. We can link that in the show notes as well. If you have any questions, please send them through to us as per normal. otfcgroup.au is our email. Otherwise, OTFC Group on Instagram and OTFC Group on TikTok. And we hope to answer those questions and find the fun in learning how to support the young people in our lives. Thank you, and speak to you next time.